Number two, the world does not look like X, fill in the blank, right? In other words, take a look around you. If God did exist and if Jesus was the only way to God, then the world should look like X. But point number two, because the world doesn't, then three, conclusion, therefore God doesn't exist. Now this structure, by the way, where we have point one, point two, and point three, is known in logical circles as syllogism or predicate one, predicate two, and conclusion three. So we have point one, point two leading to a conclusion. Again, this is just a basic form of what we call syllogism, where 2 points lead to the conclusion. If point one is accurate and if point two is accurate, then point three must also be accurate because it's the conclusion of the logical inference drawn from points one and two. All right, so this is what a skeptic might look at, an atheist might look at if he were having a discussion about why he believes that God doesn't exist. All right, listen to this author's explanation. There really is no end to the number of hypothetical conditions the atheist can come up with as logical criteria for the existence of God. So what is wrong with this type of argument? Remember, we're having a discussion about why biblical Unitarians choose not to believe all of the data that's supplied for us in the Bible that should lead us to the conclusion that God is a tripart God, that he's not three gods, but that he's one God, but he's complex in his unity, such as that we can describe him in terms of three persons. Even though the word person doesn't show up in the Bible, we insert a word that helps us relate with God on our level, because we as individuals are persons. We share and enjoy personhood, and we describe it using various realities that we interact with one another, like person A, person B. And when we look at the Bible, we notice that there are three distinct realities that we have to deal with in certain parts of the Bible that would lead us to the conclusion that it's one God. And yet it's a bit challenging that there's three, you can fill in the blank if you don't like the word persons, but three somethings going on there as well. But it's not three gods, right? So let's continue. This author says, basically, and remember, he's a Trinitarian, and he's trying to philosophically ascertain why biblical Unitarians shouldn't come to some of the same conclusions that we Trinitarians do. Basically, and this is his opinion, he says, the problem is that it isn't an argument based on any actual evidence for the atheist position. It's an argument based on the lack of some special kind of evidence that the atheist has predetermined is the kind of evidence necessary to prove God's existence from the atheist perspective. Are you following what I'm saying? So it's not that we it's not that atheists say, well, I mean, look at the microscope, look at the universe, look at the signature of God all over the place. It's not that the atheist is really ignoring all those things. In some cases it is. Those of us who do believe that there is a God, we often point to so many arguments in proof of God, right? We have what's called the cosmological argument, where we look at the heavens and the universe, and we say there's no way that everything could exist the way it does in such an orderly way if there wasn't an intelligent creator that put all this stuff together, or at least is overseeing it. If you go to the store and pick up a Rolex watch, right, a fine expensive timepiece, right? I'm just using Rolex as an example. There are other watches I could have picked, but let's just pick up Rolex, for example. If you take this Rolex apart, you would find that there is intricate order inside that watch, right? Detailed movement and precision that can only be attributed to intelligent creation, meaning humans who are very smart put this thing together. There's no way it could have simply evolved, is the point I'm trying to make, right? There's no way it could have come to be on its own, right? The very movements and the precision of this instrument, this Rolex watch, it just screams that I was manufactured by an intelligent mind. Well, the same thing happens with everything around us, right? So those are arguments that we're saying the atheist doesn't really always say ignore. Rather, he instead inserts his own, say, argument based on silence or based on lack of detail. Hey, if God really exists, then why doesn't this condition exist? Or if God truly exists, why isn't there universal peace on earth and blah, blah, blah? It's similar to the way unbelieving Jews argue against Jesus being the Messiah. Quite often, you guys have probably heard this, quite often one of the reasons unbelieving Jews reject Jesus as the candidate for Messiah is they say, because if Jesus was really the Prince of Peace like you Christians say, then how come there's no peace on earth? Right? How come there's no peace in the Middle East? If Jesus is your Prince of Peace, who's supposed to bring peace to everyone, how come there's no universal love yet? Right? How come Israel's still suffering under her oppressors and with all the violence in the Middle East and blah, blah, blah? You know, how come there's all of this and all of that? The argument from the doubter and the skeptic and the atheist is similar to the argument from the non-Trinitarian, is what the this author is trying to talk about. So the argument's also, he says, let me back up. It's an argument based on the lack of some special kind of evidence that the atheists have predetermined is the kind of evidence necessary to prove God exists. How incredibly convenient. He continues, the argument is also not an argument from logic in any way, since the person simply declaring what kind of evidence counts isn't the same thing as employing logic. In other words, it all becomes personal. It all becomes his own, what we might call not objective viewpoint, but his own subjective viewpoint. Let's continue. To make the argument that your opponent is being illogical is a specific type of argument. It's called an internal critique or a reductio ad absurdum. Whatever you call it, I may have butchered the Latin there, but whatever you call it, it is an argument that there is some kind of internal inconsistency within the set of beliefs you are calling illogical. This author continues, now, if someone wants to show a set of beliefs to be illogical, one pretty important rule is that they have to limit themselves to talking about those beliefs. It's pretty straightforward, but missed a lot. If the atheist says Christianity is illogical, then his case cannot be based on an argument that has to utilize premises that Christians don't believe. He can't, in other words, then he gives an example when he says premises. For instance, in our example above, in our syllogism of 1, 2, and 3, point 1 and 2 are the premises, and point 3 is the conclusion. For instance, listen to the premise. Could be premise 1 or 2. Premise says, he can't say if God exists, he would give everyone personal proof. Since he hasn't, your beliefs are illogical. You can't go in that direction, even though you'd like to, because these are all subjective arguments, and you're not actually arguing against things that Christians don't believe. Christians don't believe that God should give everyone their own personal proof, such as the skeptic might think. Christians that I know of don't say, we do believe in God, and the proof that we believe in God is that God has told everyone that he is real, that he gives them all their own personal proof. In fact, it's often to we believers, to our disappointment, it's actually quite the opposite sometimes. Lord, why don't you reveal yourself more to other people? I have plenty of unsaved friends, family members, loved ones that I wish God would reveal himself to them. He doesn't give them personal proof of his existence. So I'm painfully aware of the exact opposite. So I'm not arguing from the atheist perspective that if God exists, he'd give everyone personal proof. In other words, what this author of this blog is pointing out is that this is an illogical argument because it doesn't use premises that Christians believe. It uses premises that Christians don't believe. So he continues, that doesn't work for the simple reason that the Christian rejects the first premise, right? We don't argue that God should give everybody personal proof of his own existence. It would be nice, but we're not making that argument. The atheist is imposing rather his own non-Christian criteria on Christians and calling them illogical for not conforming to it. Does that make sense? So the atheist is saying, I've got a problem. Your God doesn't reveal himself to everybody, and therefore I don't believe in him. But in reality, that's not a Christian deficiency. That's the atheist deficiency. That's his own baggage. That's his own illogical argument that he needs to take up with God himself. That's the point this blogger is making. The atheist is imposing his own non-Christian criteria on Christians and calling those Christians illogical for not conforming to it. If the atheist wants to show the Christian is illogical, then what the atheist needs to do is to limit himself to analyzing what Christians actually believe. That's when the argument becomes logical and becomes factual and becomes relevant. So he says, how does all this relate to Unitarians? First, Unitarians love to appeal to logic to show that Trinitarians are wrong, right? There's a whole argument out there on the internet land known as the logical problem of the Trinity. You can Google search that phrase, the logical problem of the Trinity. It boils down to this: how can God be three if God is one, and how could God be one if Trinitarians say he's three? So it's the math problem, right? It's illogical to people who are non-Trinitarians, right? Are you talking about one God? Are you talking about a God who's broken up into three parts? Are you talking about a three-headed God? Are you talking about three total separate gods? What's the deal? So that's what we call the logical problem of the Trinity. John Schoenheit's website, Biblical Unitarian, he's the gentleman that we've been interacting with. Let me just pop over and show you his website again. Biblical Unitarianism is, I don't know if he created the site, but he's certainly one of the primary contributors. So I'll flash a little picture in post-production of him on the screen where you can see him. John Schoenheit or Schoenheit. I've still yet to know exactly how to pronounce his name. I'm of the impression it's Schoenheit. But his website, Biblical Unitarian, has an entire heading under its articles sections called Logic. Some of the titles of articles here are Equivocation, the Art of Changing the Rules in the Middle of the Game. Another title, Mystery versus Contradiction. And yet another title, Basic Laws of Thought. And finally, a fourth title, Logical Fallacies Employed in Trinitarian Logic. You get the idea. All right. Sean Finnegan, in his debate with Brant Bosserman, said, this is a Trinitarian versus Unitarian debaters, said that he thinks logic is a very important tool God has given to us to know the truth, and we shouldn't downplay it. He says, quote, I think reason, this is a quote from Finnegan, I think reason is this beautiful gift God has given us to sort out everything we do in life. And if you're reading this blog, you can actually click on the video link to listen to that quote from Sean Finnegan. This blogger continues. He states that the Trinitarian definition of God is, quote, is not paradoxical but contradictory. Again, a link to the video. End quote. Virtually any time you see a Unitarian explaining or arguing against Trinity, listen to this very, very, very carefully. Virtually any time you see a Unitarian arguing or explaining against Trinity, you can count on them at some point describing Trinitarian belief as illogical, irrational, ridiculous, or some such synonym. Like the atheist, this blogger continues, like the atheist, the Unitarian will not actually formulate an argument that supports this claim. Finnegan's debate to performance is a good example of this. When he, in his opening statement, attempts to formulate an argument that the Trinity is illogical, he describes what many Trinitarians believe, that there are three persons who are distinct, yet are each fully God. He says that when someone uses this term, he has, quote, defined himself out of a definition, end quote, and that Trinitarians who use that terminology have, quote, crossed their eyes mentally and gone into mystery land, end quote. At no point does he, that's the end of the quote. This author continues here, this blogger, at no point does he actually offer an argument for these statements. And if he thinks he did, he certainly didn't offer one based on what Trinitarians believe. He just finds the Trinity to not fit with his own philosophical conclusions and thinks that that's the same as the Trinity being illogical. Let's keep reading because we're almost done. Let's see, 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3, 4, 5, and some other shorter paragraphs, and then conclusions. It's a little longer than I thought. I may extend this to next week. Let me read a few more paragraphs. Let's see. His definition. Okay. So we read Sean Finnegan's debate with Bosterman. We read that paragraph there. You can't. All right, let's begin to read this paragraph here, and then maybe I'll break this off and pick this up next week. It's worth reading, especially in our discussion with Trinitarians versus Unitarians. Honestly, let me say this in closing, in case you don't catch it. As a biblical Trinitarian myself, I am actually not out to sever my ties from biblical Unitarians. I'm seeking to find some common ground and come to some more, you can call this eclectic perspective if you want to, where I'm trying to kind of synthesize some of what they believe with what I believe. In other words, I'm of the impression that many non-Trinitarian arguments can simply be reduced to a basic understanding of monotheistic belief in God, which is something that I, as a biblical Trinitarian, affirm. I believe in a monotheistic God. I believe there's only one God. I must affirm that because that's what the Bible teaches. And based on that common starting point, biblical Unitarians also affirm the monotheistic belief that there's only one God. So if we can start there, then we can both begin to have some more meaningful dialogue and try to come to a better understanding. I'm not willing to concede that God is less than 3, to be honest with you. That's not where I'm going. I'm not willing to say, well, at the end of the day, I'm still questioning whether God is 3, and I'm hoping that the biblical Unitarian can convince me that God is less than 3. That's not where I'm going either. I'm fully convinced from a convictional perspective that God is 3. Right? He is 3, meaning there are 3 persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I hold that truth with a conviction. I'm not ready to budge or yield on that. I will follow my sword for that. Contrary to other doctrines that I won't follow my sword for, this is one that I would. I do believe there are 3 persons. But I also believe that Jesus is fully God. He's fully divine. He's full deity. Likewise, the Holy Spirit is fully divine. He's not an impersonal force or thought of God or an object that can be passed around from person to person, or something that's just dispatched in agency fashion. He is fully God. He's the third person of the Trinity. So I hold that with a conviction because that's the way I understand the Bible to be revealing the nature of God. But what I'd like to do in holding these discussions, where I'm reading through these blogs and things like that, is to be able to have a more well-meaning dialogue with biblical Unitarians in hopes of helping them to see some of the deficiencies in the perspective that they hold. My prayer is that they would come over and jump ship and become biblical Trinitarians as well, drop the Unitarian label and become biblical Trinitarians like myself. But until that time comes, I at least want to seek to better educate them on the way they're misunderstanding some of the Unitarian perspectives like I think they are. So let me read this paragraph and probably then draw it to a close. Let me see, 1, 2... Maybe we can read down through and stop at the questions. So this blogger says, this leads me to the other way that they're related. Unitarians think the result of their own thinking are the same thing as logic itself. As such, they look at the scriptures and make assumptions about what it would say if the Trinity were true, right? Similar to the way that atheists will say, if God really existed, then why doesn't X condition exist? Inevitably and ever so conveniently, those assumptions lead to conclusions that do not match the scriptures, leading them to conclude that the Trinity isn't biblical. And then this author says, let's consider a couple of examples. And then at this point in time, he's going to start asking a series of questions as postulated by the biblical Unitarian as to, and it's similar to the way the premises of the atheists would question, if God does exist, why don't we have X condition? So let me read this final paragraph. We'll pick this up again next week, and we'll start with this paragraph. In an article titled, Is Jesus God? Logical Questions That Need Answering, John Schoenheit asks a series of questions. I'm going to say Schoenheit until I know for sure how I pronounce it. John Schoenheit asks a series of questions that are intended to cast doubt on the deity of Christ, but these questions all assume, notice the word assume, right? We know what happens when you assume. They all assume that Scripture would look a certain way if the Trinity is true. I'll start, this blogger says, I'll start with a little more detail, but it will get repetitive, so I'll just point out the wrong assumption about the Trinity that each question implies after that, right? Let's look at them. And then next week, I'll look at question number 1, and this would be a non-Trinitarian question about the Trinity. Question, if Jesus is God, how could he die for our sins? This is a typical non-Trinitarian question. We'll begin to look at the answers next week. But that'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarian.